I am Dr. F. Perry Wilson. I'm an associate professor of medicine and public health at the Yale School of Medicine. And I'm joined today by two amazing physicians, Dr. Rade Tomic, who is a professor of medicine, pulmonology, and critical care, and director of the Lung Transplant Program at Northwestern Medicine. I am also joined by Dr. Ankit Bharat, the chief of thoracic surgery at the Canning Thoracic Institute and a professor of surgery at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me to discuss what is really an amazing case that came out in the news, and a lung transplant, the likes of which I don't think has ever been conducted in the United States. I want to jump in and ask Dr. Tomic to start us off and tell me a bit about this patient, Davey Bauer. Who was Davey Bauer?
So Mr. Bauer is the patient that we got from St. Louis. He was having history of vaping, got multiple infections, first viral infection, then pseudomonas pneumonia, and had really severe infection in his both lungs. He was on the ventilator. The ventilator was not sufficient to keep him alive. He was then placed on the ECMO, and he was dying of the ECMO. There was no any other options for him at that time. Antibiotic treatments were not efficient. He was failing antibiotic treatments, and unfortunately, ECMO was not bridge for the survival or for the improvement.
Yeah, let me dig in there a little bit. This is a 34-year-old guy who's essentially healthy, except that he had been a cigarette smoker and a vapor and came in with influenza A. I mean, this isn't anything, particularly unusual, but obviously complication after complication leading to vent-dependent respiratory failure. I've, unfortunately taken care of a number of patients on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Dr. Bharat, why do we come to ECMO? What is the surgical decision-making to actually put a patient on essentially what's cardiopulmonary bypass, but not for a cardiac procedure?
Yeah, so ECMO, as you pointed out, it's in simply put, it's a mechanism through which we can replace or provide replacement for failing lungs or failing heart. And it's essentially the highest level of heart-lung support that we can provide any patient with heart or lung failure, particularly in the context of Davey Bauer and patients who have respiratory failure. When they develop some kind of injury to the lung and they're not able to maintain their gas exchange and oxygen levels, we typically put them on a ventilator. But then there comes a point where the injury becomes so severe that even the ventilator cannot really provide that level of support. So then that next and the highest level is ECMO.
Obviously, these patients are so sick. The mortality rates associated with ECMO are exceedingly high, even in young people like Mr. Bauer who are put on them. The hope, of course, is that by bypassing the heart-lung system, you allow the lungs time to heal, and eventually you wean off of ECMO and back onto the ventilator, and ideally then off of the ventilator. Dr. Tomic, this was not the case for Mr. Bauer. His lungs were not healing. What was going on in your mind when you saw someone essentially, whose lungs were failing?
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious that in spite of the maximal support from the ventilator and ECMO, patient is doing worse. ECMO was not a bridge in these circumstances to recovery. So the only option for the patient was the lung transplant.
That's a big step. And of course, in the case of lung transplant, you need to be healthy enough to get a lung transplant. And this is someone who has, a rip-roaring infection. So most of us would say this is not a candidate for lung transplant. What made you think differently?
Yeah, Dr. Bharat and we were talking about a case, and it was true that at his current condition, he's not candidate for lung transplant. He had infection in the lungs that we cannot cure. That infection was threat for the new lungs that it will come in the patient. And therefore we came to idea particularly Dr. Bharat, to actually remove the lungs from the patient. So the patient will be living without his lungs as we are waiting for the lungs to be available from the donor.
It feels really heavy and it's all just damaged and dead here, lots of spontaneous bleeding that happened. It feels so heavy here, and this is all just nasty infection. You see all just necrosis that's happening. Wow, it's one of the heaviest lungs.
So Dr. Bharat, this is where we're getting to an area that is really untrod territory. I looked, but I'm not an expert. I was unable to find a case in the literature of someone being on heart-lung bypass without lungs, at least for, with no lungs in their system, except maybe in the context of a lung transplant when, new lungs are being put in almost immediately. This was going to be an indefinite period. Has that ever been done before?
People have conceptualized this, and, in theory, it is possible to take someone's lungs out and create a mechanism with ECMO that could provide the support. I mean, hypothetically, it's even possible to take someone's heart out and keep them without a heart with the current technology. So in his case, as Dr. Tomic pointed out, when David actually arrived to Northwestern, within 24 hours, he had a cardiac arrest. That's how sick he was. We were doing chest compressions on him. And it was really clear that the lungs are the source of his infection and really driving how sick he had become. And we wanted to get him to a point of stability to get to the lung transplant. So we thought of engineering a strategy that would allow us to support his body for an extended period of time with no lungs. And that really involved creating some artificial connections between the right side of the heart and the left side of the heart, because if you think about it, the blood goes from the entire body to the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart, the right ventricle pumps it into the lungs. Lungs then perform the gas exchange and other bodily functions and then return to the left side of the heart. The left side of the heart, through the left ventricle, pumps it to the rest of the body. So when you take the lungs out, you're interrupting the natural blood flow in the body. So we had to create certain mechanisms and artificial channels in the heart, reconnecting the right and the left side of the body and implanting oxygenators to take over the function of the lung. And we had to do that in a manner that could keep the blood flowing through these artificial channels without clotting off. Because as sick as he was and how much scar tissue he had as a result of infection, if we had put him on blood thinners, which is conventionally required for standard ECMO, he would have bled out to death. So that's what we had to kind of create using a strategy of artificial lung that has not been described before, although the idea has been conceptualized.
Dr. Tomic, you had created a physiologic scenario that is not typical, which is a heart beating in a chest cavity in the absence of lungs stabilizing it from either side. You developed with Dr. Bharat a improvisational technique to keep the heart in place. This has gotten a lot of news because of how clever it was. But tell us a bit. How did you keep the heart stable in the center of the chest?
So all the credit goes back to Dr. Bharat for this idea. But we got to actually place on the both sides of the heart breast implants, the largest breast implants that we could find from our plastic surgeon colleagues, and to stabilize the heart in the position as we are waiting for the new lungs to come.
Dr. Bharat, that came to you in a flash, or were you ruminating on what to do about this for a while?
Well, we had thought a lot about how to maintain the blood flow, and I had personally discussed, and although we didn't have a lot of time, like I said, he had a cardiac arrest, and we had to do something in a matter of a few hours, and so I ran many different configurations. I actually still have, some of the renderings I made, how we're going to recreate the channels in the heart and all that. So 57 different configurations later, I thought, I could figure something out that would maintain his heart functioning in his body. But what I hadn't anticipated, and what as a team we didn't anticipate, is when you take the lungs out and then create these channels, then the how it would look, and how some of the risks would be associated, particularly if you get into the ICU. So once the lungs were out and we created these channels, that's when we realized that the heart could fall into one side. It's one of the normal functions of the lung is to keep the heart right in the center so it doesn't herniate and fall. So it was kind of one of those scenarios where we just hadn't been in that situation, so we had to improvise. And so we were thinking about how to stabilize that, and what could be the biggest thing that we had to put in the chest cavity, and that was the double D breast implant. So we kind of got that and configured them by inflating them to the right size to his chest cavity. And he was a thin person who was tall, so he had pretty big chest cavities. It worked out.
Amazing. Dr. Tomic, how long before a lung transplant was available?
It was about a little bit more than 24 hours. We were trying to get the lungs as soon as possible. So we were communicating with the other centers to get the lungs in a timely manner.
And Dr. Tomic, so the lung transplant was able to happen in a timely fashion, breast implants removed, lungs put in. And I know it was a long recuperative process, but can you let us know, how did he do, broad strokes, and how is he doing now?
He's doing great. I was just before this meeting, I look at his pulmonary function test. Every single pulmonary function test after the lung transplant is getting better.
Before and after, so you can see before all of this is just with the ECMO cannula.
So he's doing exceptionally well.
And out of the hospital?
Out of the hospital, out of the rehab, here at home in Chicago, temporary home here in Chicago, and doing really, really well.
I hope still with this significant other that was so...
She's the key person for him to get through all of this, every single step from the first meal that he has, through everything that she went through. She was such a great support help.
Right. It really is a story of many people coming together, multiple guardian angels. And I think for those of us in medicine, it's tempting, as we're just inundated with patients and office hours and people in the hospital, to, not take the kind of time that you both took, not to go to the extraordinary lengths that you all went to. I mean, to be honest, if you had said, it's too bad he's not eligible for a lung transplant because he's too sick, and he would have passed away and no one would have batted an eye. That kind of thing happens all the time. It's inspiring to see someone working so hard on so many levels for just one patient, and so I don't know if you have any words of wisdom for the rest of us. How do you keep that kind of focus in the current healthcare environment?
Yeah, I think what we try to do is remind ourselves why we went into medicine, what was the most important reason. And obviously there's a lot of distraction, there are lots of pressures, there are lots of processes that have involved. But if we kind of go back and stay true to the value, what got us into medicine, that helps us really understand the effort we need to put in. We've at least that's a message we try to create here. And one of the things we like to pride ourselves calling us this, or we try to aspire to be the destination of hope for patients. And our motto is to really, while we're trying to innovate to move the field forward, we never lose the perspective that every life matters. And yes, and 10,000 patients, one Davey Bauer may not move the needle in terms of statistics, but for his family, for his significant other, he's their world. So we have to keep that in mind when we get individual patients and not get just bogged down by lots of other distractions that we are constantly faced every day.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you for the care both of you gave to this very lucky patient, someone who I would think almost any other circumstance in the world would not be with us anymore, who is going to be celebrating the holidays. And I'm sure he's very thankful as well. Dr. Rade Tomic and Dr. Ankit Bharat from Northwestern, thanks for spending some time with me today, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure.